November 4th, 1970. A frail teenage girl stepped into the Temple City welfare office beside her timid, nervous mother. Her walk was unnatural, jolting and stiff, like she was unfamiliar with how her own limbs were supposed to move. She drooled, whimpered, avoided eye contact. She wore a diaper. She flinched at every sound. To those watching, it seemed like a neglected, severely autistic child, maybe 6, maybe 7 years old at most. But she wasn't 7. She was 13. And what would soon be uncovered would leave even the most seasoned investigators speechless. This girl, nicknamed Genie to shield her real identity, wasn't born with any disorder. She hadn't suffered some tragic accident. No, Genie had been deliberately erased, not by fate, not by disease, but by her own father. Locked in a dark, windowless room for nearly her entire life, tied to a child's potty chair with no way to stand, silenced with fear, isolated so completely that even language, the very tool that makes us human, was never allowed to develop. What kind of parent does that to their child? And why? Her case would go on to become one of the most disturbing examples of child abuse in modern history. But it also raised questions no one was prepared to answer. Questions about science, ethics, and how society treats the most broken among us. This isn't just the story of a girl denied her childhood. It's the story of a soul stripped of everything that makes life meaningful, then handed over to a system that would fail her all over again. You're watching True Crimes by Dominic. If stories like this disturb you, anger you, or simply make you ask how something like this could happen, then don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found a child like Genie today, would you trust the system to protect her? Because as you'll see, the nightmare didn't end when she was rescued. In many ways, it had only just begun. Let's go back to where it all started, before the name Genie meant tragedy, before anyone knew she existed, before the silence became her entire world. Genie was born into a home already cracking under the weight of control, fear, and unspoken violence. Her parents were Irene and Clark Wiley. From the outside, they might have looked like any ordinary couple trying to build a life in post-war California. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was suffocating. Clark wasn't just a strict man. He was obsessive, possessive, and consumed by paranoia. He ruled the house with a cruel, heavy hand. And Irene lived like a ghost in her own life. His jealousy made her world smaller by the day until she could barely move without his permission. Clark didn't want children. He made that very clear. But after 5 years of this quiet domestic prison, Irene became pregnant. Late into her pregnancy, Clark lost control. He beat her so savagely that she had to be hospitalized. It was there, in a sterile, cold hospital bed, her body bruised and broken, that she gave birth to a baby girl. At first, that baby seemed like a small flicker of hope. But back home, her cries shattered Clark's carefully controlled silence. He had an intense hatred for noise. In the Wiley house, voices were kept to whispers. The radio, if played at all, was barely audible. Clark couldn't tolerate the shrill sound of a newborn wailing. So just 2 months after she was born, he did something unthinkable. He placed his infant daughter in the cold, unheated garage and left her there for days. She developed pneumonia. She died, and no one intervened. Irene became pregnant again, and again the baby didn't survive, this time from Rh disease, a treatable condition under proper medical care. But in the Wiley household, proper care was a luxury no child could count on. Then came John, their third child. Somehow he survived, if you could call it that. By age 3, John wasn't walking properly. He wasn't potty trained. His development was clearly stunted, likely from chronic neglect. That's when someone finally stepped in, Clark's mother. Clark's relationship with his mother was intense. To put it simply, he adored her, far more than he ever cared for Irene or even his children. His mother, in turn, spoiled him with affection, even as she overlooked his violent tendencies. When Clark wasn't working, it was often his mother who paid the bills. She hovered over the family, ever present, ever involved, something Irene resented deeply. Eventually, Clark's mother took young John into her home to help him catch up developmentally, and for a brief moment, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, things might stabilize. But then, in April 1957, Genie was born. For the first several months of her life, things seemed almost normal, at least compared to the horrors that would come later. She was likely neglected in the same quiet, subtle ways her brother had been, but there were no immediate signs of extreme abuse. She was alive. She was growing. And then, everything changed. In December of 1958, Clark's world collapsed. His mother, the one person he depended on emotionally, the only person he seemed to truly care about, was killed by a drunk driver. Something inside Clark snapped. Whatever thin thread of humanity was holding him together finally broke. He spiraled, fast and hard. No longer just controlling, Clark became deeply paranoid and delusional. He convinced himself that the world outside was evil, corrupt, poisonous, that his family needed to be protected from it at all costs. But his idea of protection was twisted. He moved his family into his late mother's house, a house already filled with grief and silence. It had 2 bedrooms. One, his mother's former room, was turned into a shrine. No one was allowed to touch it. It had to remain exactly as she'd left it, untouched, preserved, like a frozen memory. The other bedroom? That's where Genie was placed. Clark, Irene, and John confined themselves to the living room at night, sleeping on the floor like fugitives in their own home. But Genie, she was completely alone. And that, right there, is when the real nightmare began. This isn't just a story about abuse. It's about how obsession can rot the human mind, how a father's grief turned into tyranny, and how a little girl was left to suffer in silence, while the world just kept spinning outside her window. John, Genie's older brother, slept on a thin pallet on the living room floor. He didn't have a bedroom or even a proper bed, just a blanket on the ground. Clark and Irene didn't share a bed either. Instead, they sat upright in separate armchairs through the night, as if they were keeping watch. And in a way, they were. Clark always kept a loaded revolver on his lap. His paranoia had grown so twisted that he believed the world outside might come crashing in at any moment. His delusions made him believe he was protecting his family, when in reality, he was the danger they needed protection from. In those early weeks after moving into his dead mother's home, there were still glimpses of something close to normal, if you squinted hard enough. Genie, now a toddler, was sometimes placed outside in the yard in a playpen. The sun would touch her skin. She could see the sky, but even that small mercy didn't last. According to Susan Curtis, a linguist who would later study Genie's tragic case, Irene once admitted something chilling, that Genie, when left in the playpen, had learned to dismantle it with her fingernails. Imagine that. A toddler, so desperate, so alone, that she figured out how to claw her way out of a cage meant for play. That's not normal behavior for a 2-year-old. That's survival instinct. In that moment, her taking the playpen apart may have been the last straw for Clark. Whatever little freedom Genie had was swiftly ripped away. His paranoia grew worse. He tightened his grip on the household, tighter and tighter, until eventually Genie wasn't allowed outside anymore. Not even in the yard, not even into the living room. She was sealed away in that one tiny bedroom, her father's fear morphing into full-blown delusion. His need for control had transformed into a monstrous cruelty. She was barely 2 years old. But the cruelty didn't stop at confinement. Genie wasn't just shut away from the world. She was restrained in ways that defy belief. The room that became her prison contained just 3 pieces of furniture: a tall cabinet, a crib, and a homemade potty chair. And that potty chair, that's where Genie spent the majority of her life. Clark had rigged it with straps. He built a crude harness designed to pin her arms and legs so she couldn't move freely. His excuse? To stop her from touching her own waist. But make no mistake, this wasn't about hygiene. This was about control, isolation, dehumanization. Day after day, Genie sat there, naked, immobilized, alone. When night came, she was sometimes moved to her crib, But even that offered no real comfort. The crib was more like a cage. It was covered in wire mesh on all sides, including the top, making it impossible for her to climb out. The sleeping bag inside could be pulled so tightly around her body that her arms were trapped against her sides. But more often than not, Clark didn't bother to move her at all. He just left her strapped to the potty chair overnight, alone in the dark. There were no toys, no books, no pictures. Nothing on the walls. The curtains were always drawn. The door was always shut. Genie's world became a colorless void of silence and stillness. Even her mother, Irene, was discouraged, if not outright forbidden, from interacting with her. Her own mother. Clark didn't just isolate Genie physically. He cut her off emotionally, socially, and mentally. He wanted her to be invisible. And when Genie did make a sound, when she cried, whimpered, or even accidentally knocked something over, Clark would respond with violence. He kept a large wooden stick in the corner of her room, always within reach. That stick became her only form of human contact. As for food, it was a pitiful excuse for nourishment. She was fed only the bare minimum to survive, things like mashed baby food or soggy cereal, and even that was given with cold detachment. Spoons shoved into her mouth as quickly as possible, as if the act of feeding her was repulsive. If she choked or gagged or spit anything out, she was punished. The food would be smeared across her face, a ritual of humiliation. This wasn't neglect. This was psychological annihilation. And Genie lived like this, not for weeks, not even for months, but for years. Years spent in silence, years tied to a chair, years of darkness, of staring at the same bare walls, hearing no voices, experiencing no love, receiving no touch other than the sting of a beating or the cold metal of a spoon. She was being erased. By the time the world found her, it was almost too late. By the time Genie turned 13, the damage was already carved deep into her bones. Imagine spending every single day of your life, from the moment your body becomes aware of the world, tied down, trapped in one position, unable to walk, move freely, speak, or even see more than 10 feet in front of you. That was Genie's entire existence. She wasn't just kept inside, she was confined, bound to a toddler's potty chair, arms and legs strapped, unable to stand, explore, or learn like any other child. Her muscles, never used properly, began to deteriorate. Her bones twisted unnaturally under pressure. Over time, her body physically molded to the shape of that chair. That's how long she sat there. According to Genie, a scientific tragedy by Susan Curtis, what Genie endured goes even deeper than what's been made public. There are details, acts of cruelty so extreme that they've never been officially released. And honestly, that's terrifying, because what we do know is already among the most horrifying cases of child abuse ever documented. Just think about your own life from age 2 to 13. That's more than a decade of growth, experiences, laughter, pain, learning to talk, to run, to dream. Genie never got any of that. She lived those years in a void of silence, punishment, and complete sensory deprivation. And during all of this, her mother, Irene, had gone nearly blind. Even if she had wanted to intervene, Irene was trapped herself, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Clark had total control. Every decision, every movement, even basic communication, had to go through him. She was a prisoner in her own home. But something finally shifted in October of 1970. Genie was 13, still shackled to that same chair. That day, Clark and Irene got into another one of their explosive fights. But this time, Irene pushed back. She told Clark she was done, that she would leave unless he allowed her to speak with her own parents. That detail may seem small, but it reveals just how deep his control ran. Irene, a grown woman, had to ask permission to contact her own family. Miraculously, Clark agreed. Maybe he didn't think she'd follow through, but Irene did. That very day, with Clark out of the house, she did something she hadn't dared in over a decade. She walked into Genie's room and set her free. Together, mother and daughter left. They went to stay with Irene's parents. And 3 weeks later, they stepped into the Temple City Social Services office. That moment changed everything. The sight of Genie, this teenager with the body language of a toddler, unable to speak, her limbs curled unnaturally, immediately set off alarm bells. She was taken into protective custody almost instantly. But what they discovered next shocked even the most seasoned professionals. Genie was barely more than skin and bone. She stood only 54 inches tall, just 4'6", and weighed a mere 59 pounds. Her hair was thin, patchy. She salivated constantly, often spitting onto nearby objects. She was incontinent. Her eyes could barely focus beyond 10 feet, the exact distance from her chair to the door she was never allowed to cross. Genie had never worn real clothes, never chewed solid food. She didn't even know how to chew. Her throat had to relearn how to swallow. Her muscles had atrophied so severely she couldn't straighten her arms or legs, let alone run or jump. When she tried to walk, she swayed from side to side, dragging her feet like someone still bound. Observers called it her bunny walk, but there was nothing cute about it. It was a haunting echo of years spent trapped in one position. Even her voice, when she finally made one, was unsettling. It came out in a breathy, high-pitched whisper, rushed and panicked, like she was afraid that making sound would bring punishment. And it probably would have, if she were still in that house. Genie never laughed when she was happy. She didn't cry when she was in pain. Her emotional expressions had been erased, muted, just like her voice. What struck the researchers most was her delayed response to everything. You could ask Genie a question, and she might answer 10 minutes later, as if time worked differently in her mind. And maybe it did. When every day is identical and silent, when there are no clocks, no conversations, no change, what does time mean? This delay, along with her complete lack of speech, drew the attention of scientists around the world. Linguists, psychologists, neurologists, they all saw Genie as something she never asked to be, a rare opportunity. A human child raised without language, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to study what they called the forbidden experiment. Because for decades, science had tried to understand how language develops, but they could only test on animals. There were the kittens raised in drums, only shown horizontal lines, so they could no longer see vertical ones. There were infant monkeys taken from their mothers and given cold, wire surrogates instead. Those experiments were horrifying, but legal, because they were done on animals. But Genie was human, and her parents had unknowingly done what no scientist was ever allowed to do. The result? Genie became a magnet for academic obsession. Researchers from prestigious universities rushed to study her. Everyone wanted a piece of her story, her trauma. And it's easy to paint them as villains, as scientists circling like vultures, dissecting her mind for fame and funding. But it's more complicated than that. Some genuinely cared. Some became emotionally attached. Many believed they were helping. And perhaps, in some ways, they were. But over the next few years, Genie would be passed between multiple foster homes, each with its own approach to rehabilitating her. Her body became the subject of endless tests. Her voice, finally beginning to emerge, was studied like a museum artifact. There were progress reports, funding disputes, clashing egos among researchers who all thought they knew what was best. In the end, it wasn't science or compassion that failed Genie. It was a system. She became a battleground, a girl-turned experiment, a human being whose first 13 years were destroyed by abuse, and whose next few were swallowed by bureaucracy, ambition, and good intentions gone terribly wrong. After years of unspeakable silence, the little girl who had been hidden away from the world finally stepped into it, and what the world saw was haunting. She was known only by the name Genie, a pseudonym chosen to shield her true identity from the media frenzy that would soon unfold. But the name fit in a chillingly poetic way. Like the mythical genie trapped in a bottle, she had spent the entirety of her childhood locked away, voiceless, isolated, waiting for someone to finally set her free. The story of Genie fascinated scientists, psychologists, linguists. It drew them like moths to a flame. What happens to the human mind when it's cut off from society for over a decade? Could she still learn? Could her brain recover? One of the most detailed sources we have about this period is Genie, a scientific tragedy by Russ Reimer. And tragedy is the right word, because while Genie's discovery sparked a wave of hope and scientific curiosity, what happened next became a disturbing blend of exploitation, shattered potential, and a second descent into darkness. In the beginning, there were signs of progress, tiny flickers of light in her otherwise dark world. Caregivers reported that she was extremely curious, even excited by the world around her. Though she couldn't speak, she would point to objects, eager to learn their names. Eventually, she began imitating those words. She wanted to connect. By 1971, Genie could speak in single words: water, go, more. A year later, she started forming two-word phrases, then short sentences. Things like, go store, want milk, and, heartbreakingly, see Mama Saturday. She would often combine words with gestures to express more complex thoughts. But even as she learned vocabulary, something crucial was missing. You see, language isn't just words, it's rhythm, structure, instinctive grammar rules that most of us absorb without realizing. Rules that our brains are only open to during childhood. Linguist Eric Lenneberg called this the critical period, a window from around age 2 until puberty where our brains are wired to naturally acquire language. Genie missed that window. She could mimic, yes. She could point. She could label. But full language, the fluid, instinctive communication most of us develop by age 5, was forever out of her reach. There's a subtle but powerful example of this. In English, we might say, I gave the book to John, or I gave John the book. Both are correct, but if we try to do the same with donated, it doesn't work. I donated the book to John is fine, but I donated John the book? That just sounds wrong. It's a rule you've probably never thought about, yet your brain knows it. Genie's brain never got that wiring. Instead, she used phrases like, I like, not because she meant affection, but because it felt like a sentence starter. I like log. I like Davy. She was trying to talk, but the pieces never quite fit. Still, her language wasn't the only window into her past. Sometimes, through words or behavior, Genie gave disturbing glimpses into what had been done to her. She would say things like, Father hit, big stick. Father take piece wood, hit, cry. Short, broken sentences, but their meaning was crystal clear. Other signs of trauma showed up in less obvious ways. Genie had an obsession with plastic containers, Tupperware, buckets, boxes. She hoarded them, clutched them like treasures. Her mother would later admit that, during her captivity, Genie had been given an empty cottage cheese container to play with while she was strapped to her potty chair. It was her only toy. She was also terrified of dogs. Even the smallest puppy would send her into a panic, often causing her to bolt into traffic to escape. Later, caregivers discovered why. Her father, Clark, used to growl outside her door, imitating dogs to keep her quiet. Some reports even claim he sharpened his fingernails so he could scratch her face when she cried. And what punishment did he face? Almost none. A month after Genie was rescued, just before he was set to appear in court, Clark took his own life. He left behind a cryptic note, "The world will never understand you." And in a final jab at his own daughter, he wrote, "You want to see your father. Father is not living." Genie was left to navigate the world without the one person who could have faced justice for what she endured. But perhaps the most tragic part of this story came after her rescue. At first, Genie's progress seemed promising. She lived with loving foster families. She was surrounded by researchers who wanted to help her. And yes, some who wanted to study her. But when she turned 18, everything changed. Genie was returned to her mother, Irene. Back to that same house, that same neighborhood, that same dark history. But Irene wasn't equipped to care for her. Not emotionally, not physically, not mentally. Genie's trauma had shaped her behavior, and soon Irene gave up. She contacted the California Department of Health and handed Genie back to the state. This time, though, she wasn't placed in warm, nurturing homes. She was sent to cold, clinical foster care, places where abuse, verbal, physical, was part of daily life. Genie began to shut down. All the progress she'd made unraveled. The light in her eyes dimmed. She stopped speaking. She stopped trying. One of the psychologists who worked with Genie, Dr. J. Shirley, later showed author Russ Reimer a box of photographs. The last two pictures weren't of a child anymore. They showed a large, heavy-set woman with a vacant expression, eyes dull, posture slumped, face locked in a confused grin. At first, Reimer didn't even recognize her. That, Shirley said, was Genie, her 27th birthday. And then again, when she was 29, still miserable, still institutionalized. She was this isolated person, incarcerated for all those years, Shirley recalled. And then she emerged and lived in a more reasonable world for a while. And then the door was shut again. Her soul was sick. He looked at the photo. This is soul sickness, he said. There's no medical explanation for her decline, but something inside her just gave up. As for where Genie is today, there's very little public information. A 2011 Guardian article reported that she was still in state care, her location undisclosed. The authorities, it said, refused to speak about her. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe after a life of being watched, poked, studied, and failed, she deserves peace. But the haunting truth remains. Genie wasn't just a girl locked in a room. She was a symbol of how deeply the system can fail, how curiosity can sometimes become exploitation, and how childhood wounds, left untreated, never really heal. We may never know where Genie is now. Her records are sealed, her location confidential, and while her name once made headlines and fueled debates in classrooms and research labs, the world has long since moved on. But she hasn't. Not really. The last known glimpse we have of her comes not from a camera lens or a medical file, but from something far more personal, a drawing she made in 1977, just 2 years after she was placed back into care. It's simple, childlike, a figure labeled Mama, another marked Baby Genie. The handwriting isn't hers, but the words were dictated by her. I miss Mama. Mama's hand. Baby Genie. We don't know if she was remembering a rare moment of comfort or imagining one she never got to live, a fantasy, a hope, a plea. She was asked once, "Where did you live?" Her answer, "I lived in the potty chair." Not a room, not a home, not a bed. Just that chair, that prison, that silence. And that's the part that stays with you, isn't it? Because Genie wasn't just denied a childhood. She was denied the very things that make us human: love, language, connection. And even when she was finally pulled from the darkness, the system that promised to help her ended up losing her all over again. So as you sit with this story, I'll leave you with a question, one I hope you'll answer in the comments. If a child like Genie was discovered today in this world of social media, surveillance, and so-called progress, would we do better? Or would history quietly repeat itself, just with brighter screens and better headlines? Let me know what you think below. This has been True Crimes by Dominic, where every week we bring you the stories that still echo through time, the ones that remind us how fragile justice can be and how easily the forgotten stay forgotten. If this story moved you, if it broke your heart or made you think, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. New true crime stories drop every week, and we dive deep beneath the headlines into the silence. And don't forget to turn on notifications. That way you'll never miss a moment, never miss a truth that's been buried too long. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop asking the hard questions. This is True Crimes by Dominic. Thank you for watching.